Mr. Ascari. I will open it soon here for questions and comments. I would just say that we have had two excellent presentations by two, actually I didn't know, but both Professor Geraci and Mr. Tillman have both been bankers who know the economic facts and have presented a good deal of them today. We have had a spokesman from Pakistan who I understand was actually also a security expert. And perhaps one could say that the best security is economic cooperation, not not how you can confront your enemy with military hardware. But the main point here is that this has been a very successful webinar roadshow documenting how economic cooperation, specifically in Pakistan, could work, and how the Belt and Road can be a forum for global economic development. And we have demonstrated in substance the points and the arguments that are valid. We will, as my colleague also said, we will continue to raise these forums together with our friends from Pakistan, from China, from perhaps some of the other embassies, other countries who are open to discussing the substance of the importance of this type of global cooperation. I would say that for those who are arguing so vociferously against China and perhaps others in the name of democracy, that they will provide a transparent forum for us to be able to present these relevant points to the population of Sweden, of Norway, of Finland, and population of Britain and Italy, as well as the United States. In fact, I would maybe even propose that we are going to, or I might be a part of setting up a Belt and Road Institute in the United States, because apparently the US Senate has decided to donate a lot of money, as Mr. Ascari said, to misrepresent the Belt and Road Initiative. So we have on our side, we have the possibility of defending our point of view with the substances, and we are willing to have any kind of open dialogue and discussion with any major media, provided it's a live program where we can be sure that we are not being misquoted, or with relevant institutions, because these, and I would say that the participants in this particular forum would be very welcome from my standpoint in further participation in this context, because we are not stopping here. We are going to go forward with these ideas until, in my view, we have succeeded in bringing the rest of the world into an understanding of the benefits of the Belt and Road and what it means for development. So with that said, I will open, I think we have Michelle Rasmussen, who has put up her hand. I think there could be others. I believe that there are some people who have asked me to ask questions on the chat. So I will have to look through those, but Mrs. Rasmussen, would you like to speak? You're welcome.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for a wonderful webinar. Both parts have been very inspiring. And I am the vice president of the Schiller Institute in Denmark. And I would like to invite all of the participants to attend a webinar which will occur on May 8th, sponsored by the International Schiller Institute, called The Moral Collapse of the Transatlantic World Cries Out for a New Paradigm. It will start at 1500 hours Central European time. And the Schiller Institute has been involved in promoting the idea with the leadership of Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp LaRouche for the ideas that became, many of the ideas that then became the Belt and Road Initiative and the idea of a world land bridge. And the idea of the webinar will be, instead of having a policy of sanctions, for example, against Yemen and Syria and that type of foreign policy, to really promote the win-win cooperation for economic development between all of the countries of the world as a way of getting not only development, but world peace. So I just invite the participants to attend this webinar. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Rasmussen. Do we have other questions regarding the subject matter of the presentations by Professor Geraci and Mr. Tillman, and as well as Mr. Askari? I wanted to check. I think there might have been a question that was put on the yes, here is one from for Mr. Geraci. I have a question for Michele. If I cannot be there for the question and answer, I don't know. Well, Mr. Chilani, it looks like you are present. Maybe you want to ask it yourself. You're muted, but perhaps if you're not there, I will ask it for you. The question is, how can Italy contribute to the BRI project in Pakistan? I'm thinking at investments in the textile industry and energy, for instance, but certainly you have a better knowledge and recommendations. Secondly, you have always stressed the importance of cooperation between Italy and China in third countries, specifically Africa. Can you elaborate on that? So, Professor Geraci, are you with us, I hope? Hello, Professor? Well, it doesn't seem that he is perhaps at the moment there. I have not seen if there are other questions.
Stephen, I have a small remark to make in
Stephen,
terms of.
sorry. Hi, Stephen. I'm back.
Oh, you're back, Professor. Okay, very good. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I heard the question, and the.
You have to unmute. Professor?
The question was from Mr. Celani on regarding the Belt and Road use of cooperation in third countries, right?
Yes, and also if you could elaborate on the work that you have done in regards to specifically Africa.
The question, no, thank you. I thank Claudio for Mr. Celani for the question. The question is very pertinent because One thing that is always misunderstood is that the purpose of the Belt and Road is not just to have operation and development in the countries that signed the MOU, so Italy and or China. So it is not just about Chinese investment in Italy, but it's also about common investment into the regions of the Belt and Road, which pretty much means every Asian and every African country at least, and then also parts of Europe. So the cooperation is indeed needed in Africa. If you recall at the beginning, I said that the economic and the ethic drive for the development. In Africa, we do have both. I think we do have to make sure that Africa develops in a sustainable way. And this is not just because we are nice and we want the African people to have the future that they deserve, but it is also because this is a new market and an opportunity. So the cooperation in third country, specifically in Africa or even in Pakistan and other countries of Asia, is really, from my point of view, a need, a must do for Europe that is the continent that will have the lowest growth rate in the whole world. And so we need to find new markets. And these markets are in Asia, in Central Asia, and also in Africa. Now, the way to do it is, like, for example, we're trying to analyze the complementary skills of Chinese and, for example, Italian companies that have in certain sectors like agricultural development, machinery, or infrastructure and construction, where Italian companies are very good in construction. If I may say, they are better when they do things outside of Italy than when they build roads in Italy. And Chinese company are good, but they also need a little bit maybe of a European or Western partner for issues related to image, branding, soft power. And in a way, and this is my advice that I also give to our Chinese friends, when you go in a joint operation with a Western partner, it dilutes all the possible criticism. I think, Stephen, you have invited your American co-citizen to also join the Belt and Road, because this is really what we would like to see. In Japan, of course, you know, once we had a project, it's in Pakistan, between Italy, China, US, and Japan, and we can do it in Pakistan, we can do it in India, and I know there are very big differences, and we do stuff in India, for example, but if we have a joint ownership of the project, is not just China, I think all the criticism will be dissipated. Now, imagine if the problem of Sri Lanka or some debt trap in Montenegro, if it were not just China, but let's assume it were Italy, China, US jointly doing a project in Montenegro, they may have had problems. Let's assume it would be had been the same in Sri Lanka or in Malaysia and other countries. All the criticism toward China would immediately disappear, because it would be a criticism against ourselves. And that's why I said the political argument would then be completely devoid of any substance. We will go back to economics, the numbers on which we can solve the problem. So not only is a need for the investing countries that we gain benefit from investing in countries that have a higher GDP growth, but it's also a key benefit for China to dilute its presence and so make it less and less, let's say, more immune to criticism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor. That is exactly the pathway to the future, that when the majority of the world and the largest economic powers as Japan, as the United States, would understand the benefits for themselves and the rest of the world, then these type of arrangements can be consolidated and should be consolidated. And I think that that's a very important point, that this is not a, as it is being turned into in many incorrect and false arguments, that this is simply an initiative or it's an operation only from China. It is a gateway for all nations. And what you have just outlined in terms of the potential development in Asia and in Africa, which, by the way, has the largest youth population in the world. And if you look at human beings as an asset for development, that is the human creative spirit and the mind as an asset for economic development rather than as a burden, then you see that the potential for that kind of joint operations between Italy and Africa and will only develop very rapidly. So are there other questions or comments?
I think there was a comment from my friend, co-speaker Henry Tillman, about the U.S. investments in Africa, because it's true. He says that yesterday Total suspended its LNG project in Mozambique due to threats from ISIS, the terrorist group. This was USA's first BRI loan for $5 billion. $1 billion from the UK, and I think the rest by the US Exim Bank. It's true that the Trump administration reactivated the US Exim Bank to give loans to projects in Africa. Obama had suspended that, funny enough, doing a big service to Africa. But almost all American and British investments and French investments in Africa are in the extraction sector, like this one you mentioned in Mozambique. It's a huge natural gas extraction project. So, and the United States and Britain have invested more than China in Africa, actually, historically. I think just recently, China surpassed the United States and Britain as the biggest investor in Africa, but there's a big qualitative difference in the Chinese investments, which are diversified because most of it is in infrastructure. The 1/3 is about in manufacturing, and then 1/3 in extraction, raw materials. But if you look at the US and British investments, they are in two sectors. The majority is in extraction, raw materials, just taking wealth from Africa, and the rest is in the financial services, which is also taking wealth out of Africa. But they are building nothing which benefits the nations of Africa in terms of transport, water, power, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So there's a qualitative difference between the Chinese investments and US, British, and French investments in Africa.
If I could also comment, Hussein, the reason I put that in there, I thought to make everyone chuckle a bit, because you did such a good job of making me chuckle about 30 minutes ago. So number one, I'm a banker for 30 years. I've been on credit committees of 3 of the world's largest banks. And we always laugh that the last one in is the worst credit possible. So this is the US Exim on their first move to become their new BRI platform is a $5 billion into a land filled with ISIS jihadists. And it was, and to be blunt, I'm also an advisor, as I mentioned. One of my board members is a very senior energy advisor to many governments. So China walked from this investment years ago. Trump plowed $5 billion into it, dragged the US and Japan into it, and now you've got a huge mess with ISIS. So it's easy to say there's so many things wrong with the BRI. His first move into his way to compete and boasting, I've competed with China and beat them, look what happened. So that's why I wanted to share the story with everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Henry. That was very good.
It was very useful. Thank you, Mr. Tillman. I think that there's also one important point which is implicit but should be emphasized, that Western investment, as my colleague said, in Africa, going even back to the worst days of colonialism, has always been how they can pull out raw materials and thereby trying to define the idea of economic well-being in terms of raw material wealth. Now, raw materials are very useful and they should be used in the context of development, but they do not constitute the essence of economic wealth. That is defined by the power of the human productivity and through human creative thinking, that is, through technologies that are advancing the benefits of the populations, not simply how you're pumping oil or other things which you can then sell for major profit. Profit is not bad if it's something that is done in the context of what also serves the common interests of the people and the nation. So I just add that in light of the fact that the history of the US and Britain in Africa has not been, or IMF, World Bank, has not been investment in major modern infrastructure or modernization. And that's what must change. And the Belt and Road is the vehicle that could provide the platform for that. And would most definitely love to see the United States join hands with China to do those kinds of joint projects. I would. Thank you.
Stephen, can I give you one good thing to finish this for you for the day? Last year, of all the investments that went into that China made in healthcare, despite all the noise you saw, the number one location for all Chinese investments in healthcare last year was into the USA. And the number one investment last year of companies investing, funds investing in China came from the USA. So forget all the noise and the 300 million. The actual answer is there are real funds flowing, there's real technology flowing, and it works at the operating level. That said, much lower levels. Below the parapet, no one's put their hand up and said, we might want to make an issue. But it still all works. So as you venture into the USA, there's still a lot of flow happening.
Well, that's good. That's good. Good contribution. I agree with you. The economic side of things can work and should work in that precisely those kinds of directions. And it is definitely the case that China has been a number one provider, even to the US military, of health services. So besides the noise and the ideology, there is that reality. And that's my point in why we want to spread the benefits of this kind of webinar and forum to give that knowledge to people in general who are often being misled and manipulated by information that is not truthful.
Stephen, I have a small comment to make based on our experience in Pakistan. Can I state that?
You're most welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, about my friend Askari mentioned about the narrative and the battle of narrative. We went through this since its inception in 2013 till to date, and but what I see now is based on my own literature review and based on my experience in CPEC. I think the narrative of debt trap, and here we had the East India Company's narrative again and again repeatedly highlighted, and comparing Hamban Tuta with Gwadar. I think that has outlived its life based on the fact that the action on ground was significant and it was able to demonstrate the socio-economic change that was happening. The other thing with respect to learning from African model, in 2017, when we were preparing our long-term plan for CPEC, what we did was that we invited Professor Lin Yifu from China, and based on his structural economics research on Ethiopia and his work on the investment flow from China to Ethiopia, we learned was that in Pakistan, in our SCZs, our first investment attraction should be on labor-intensive industries, because the level of training and vocational exercise is much lesser as compared to high-tech industries. So for that, we went again and again. We learned from Laos and Cambodia also. So I think the integration, not just of the infrastructure, but also of knowledge sharing, helped us, a country like Pakistan, to develop and be ahead of others in terms of CPEC in comparison to all the other 6 corridors.
Great, thank you. Do we have others who have questions or comments of relevance to hopefully what the speakers have outlined. I just want to again emphasize that all of our speakers, but Mr. Tillman and Professor Gerace were very, very important in outlining the on-the-ground facts of how the economic processes are working. And this is a very important element of meeting these kinds of misrepresentations, like the debt trap that my colleague had tackled, and Mr. Ascari had tackled in an earlier point. So that's, I think, it's an important pathway for the future of these kinds of exchanges. Yes, I see that we have a person, Gui Hina Shah, will like to say something. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name too badly.
No worries. Thank you very much. I think I have more of a comment rather than a question. So I'm Gule Hina Shahzad, and I'm from Pakistan, and I'm doing my PhD actually in political science at the University of Milan in Italy. And currently I'm based in the Netherlands. So I'm really happy to be kind of like attending this in an environment where we have speakers from the diplomatic side and also the scholars, and covering a lot of variety of the Belt and Road investments. And I'm currently studying that in terms of my doctorate. So looking at the Chinese investment in Asia and looking at also the governance impact. So I'm looking at empirical data. And when it comes to the Chinese investments in different countries, the problem often we face is in terms of how to identify the Chinese investments. So is it a Chinese FDI going to the countries, or is it some part of grant and loan? Of course, in the case of Pakistan, we see a different composition. So some part is dedicated as a grant component, some is dedicated as a loan part. So just, I think when we look at the Belt and Road investments overall, if you have some resources on categorization of these various Chinese investments, I think that would be a really good step to kind of elaborate further on that and build up on the research on the BRI. Thank you.
Can I address that, because that's what I do for a living?
Yes, you're welcome.
And I just was able to survive varying MOFCOM format. It took me years to vary it. So MOFCOM and WIND, which is their Bloomberg, only does FDI, and only upon closing, and only on outbound. So it's outbound. Once it gets to Hong Kong, it's outbound. So once once it's going to outbound, China's outbound. Sorry, Hong Kong. It's outbound, number one. Number two, they only do FDI. They don't go below FDI. And number three, they don't do it till it closes, right? We don't do that because we live in the West. We do it upon announcement. Yes, upon announcement, outbound announcement, because by law, it's an announcement, number one. Number two, we go below FDI because the Chinese learned years ago the regulators are going to start looking at 10% or more stakes. So now they're doing roughly 50% of their investments below 10%. So it's growth capital, so they're not being slowed. Now, most places, accountancy firms, McKinsey don't do that. We are the only one. We and Dealogic are the only ones who do that. So and also the FT has a below FDI threshold too. So the answer to your question is all of those are counted above. So it's policy loans, yes. And you can get that information from SAIS Carry or from ourselves, which is ChinaInvestmentResearch.org. But none of us actually, we have the amount of loans granted, we have the amount of loans ultimately done, but none of us have the flow per month or per quarter, because that's only private information from the Chinese government. So nobody has that data. If they do, it's a problem. So you can get the overall amount, and you get the amount done at the end of the time. You can't get monthly payments or quarterly payments. It's against the law. So you can get the policy loans. You can get bank loans. from any of the bank providers, Bloomberg, et cetera, et cetera. You get announced through us. You can get closed through MOFCOM. That's FDI only. They have to go one step below to get below FDI. And how do I know this? Because I've been negotiating with MOFCOM for 3 years to finally get them to accept the methodology, because they don't do that.
Thank you, Henry. I just missed one of the slides I wanted to show was our podcast on the sorry. We had one important podcast in our series on the China-Pakistan economic corridor with Mr. Shakil Ahmed Ramai, who's one of the great experts in Pakistan on China-Pakistan cooperation. And there in this podcast, which you can find on our website, he actually breaks down the different for the first and second phase, but mostly the first phase. What is the foreign direct investment by China, which is the majority of the projects, and what is loans and what is grants. So if you have time, check on our website and look for this podcast.
Yes, you raised an excellent point. In the last few months, there's been much more disclosure from Pakistan and from the Chinese government on what's actually been distributed as well. And the same is true with Kazakhstan. So you can now get almost all data from Kazakhstan, which was 31 billion. So you could get and the BRI project. So for many years, they didn't disclose what's been released. And now two of the biggest countries in the world, both Pakistan and Kazakhstan, which are the biggest, two of the biggest countries in the BRI in terms of numbers, you can now get good data from the government released by China. They have been sitting on this for years before they finally released it. It's always a challenge. That's how I know it so well. I do this every day for a living since 2008.
Thank you for that. Something more? You still have your hand up, Miss Guina. You help me with your pronunciation.
Yeah, you can call me Gul, the first part of the name. That's
it's Gul. It's not
Gul.
Okay.
G-U-L. Yeah,
Gul.
I think it's just stayed up from before, but yeah, thank you very much. I'll look into that as well further. And I think I can also say that here I'm based at the International Institute for Asian Studies at Leiden University. So I would be more than happy to kind of coordinate in terms of further webinars, do a collaborative conference or something. Please feel free to reach out. I can put my email in the chat, and I will be working on this project for the upcoming years. So I'm looking at Asia primarily, but also plan to do that African cases on the Chinese loan data with the SASCARI that you mentioned, Henry. So yeah, that's maybe an additional comment to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We look forward to cooperating with you. Yeah, do we have any more questions or comments at this time for any of the panelists? Institute in Sweden will be planning a new, or is planning a new webinar or roadshow type of webinar in the fall, in September, and it will most likely focus very much on what we would call the green belt and road, how those kinds of questions, which are very much on the international agenda, can also be addressed. So I would welcome everybody to join us in these exchanges in the future. I would thank Commercial Counselor Mustafa, the Embassy of Pakistan, Commercial Counselor Han from the Embassy in China, the Ambassador, His Excellency Nguyen Gui Kung Yu, and everyone from the Board of Investments and the various inputs that we have had during both the first and the second session for their participation.